Okay, hi everybody, and thank you so much for joining today's event. Just going to be waiting here for a couple more seconds while we let everybody join us from the waiting room. So thanks for joining us, and thanks for just holding on for a few more seconds. All right, good morning or good evening / afternoon, depending on where you are, and welcome to today's online event on innovation KPIs. In today's event, we're going to be sharing a framework for innovation KPIs, including innovation depth, market validation, time to innovation, and ROI, and how to use this framework to manage an innovation project for economic success. My name is Cleo, and I'm a product manager here at BlueCallom, a neuro-innovation technology company. We'll be starting the presentation very shortly, but first, I just want to run through a quick and several housekeeping items. So just for your information, we'll be recording this webinar and making it available to you in the next couple of days. So no need to take notes or screenshots or anything like that. We'll have it online very shortly. And secondly, if you have any questions or comments throughout the webinar, feel free to post them in either the chat or the Zoom Q&A box, and we'll address all of your questions at the end. So feel free to shoot us a comment when it comes to you. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Axel Schulze, who is going to be presenting today. Axel is founder and CEO of BlueCallom Group and chairman of the World Innovations Forum Foundation. Axel started and successfully exited 4 companies, the biggest reaching $5 billion in revenue and the second close to $1 billion. He's a published author and patent holder. In 2015, listed in the Global 100 Most Influential Startup Accelerators, and he also won the San Francisco Entrepreneur Award in 2008. In 2006, he chaired the SaaS Channel Committee at SIIA, the leading trade association for the software industry in the US. He was also an early advisor at LinkedIn and spent the majority of his business life in Silicon Valley. Most recently, Axel has been on a quest to discover how the brain creates and processes ideas and how some of these ideas can disrupt entire industries, and also the KPIs around the innovation process. And so with that said, Axel, I will hand the presentation over to you and look forward to hearing from you.
All right, thank you very much, Cleo, and thanks everybody for joining. This is, I think, an interesting event today, or an interesting webinar, because we're working and worked very hard on the KPI part, and we would like to share with you what we have done so far and how this actually influences and affects innovation going forward. So for those of you who have not heard a lot about us, because we're just kind of relatively young, founded last year, our business in 60 seconds, we would call ourselves a neuro innovation management solutions company. And the reason being that neuroscience has influenced our thinking, not only in general, but also very specifically in terms of innovation dramatically. And the company basically has 2 parts, and this is why we call it Neuro Innovation Management Solutions. One is the methodology, and the other is the technology. So on the methodology side, we're the developer, call it the inventor of the deep innovation design method. It's probably the most comprehensive innovation method that we have right now, and is, as I said, very strongly influenced by neuroscience. Neuroscience, because I was asked hundreds of times, how did I come up with these ideas when I built my previous 4 companies, which always happened to be disruptive and very innovative. And I didn't know that neuroscience, when I stumbled upon a couple people there, opened my eyes and changed the entire view, at least of mine, regarding innovation. And that's what we want to share with you. Now, on the right-hand side, you see a little bit about the method. So it's a canvas-based methodology where we go through a canvas. And we realized in our early projects where the canvas were actually be paper, that this is not working when a whole innovation team works in the perfect environment on the deep innovation design method, because they come up with actually hundreds and thousands of ideas or information pieces. And so we need a technology to actually capture all the data and then also compare it, use it, and build on it. And so the product, the current name of the product is BlueCallom Deep, because we're diving really deep into in many dimensions, deep in our brain and in our memories, but also deep into the data. And that's part of the topic of today is data, so that we can gather data from our processes and through the technology actually build amazing reports. And this new way of thinking had, the implication on training, and the training that we're offering and the implementation offering around the technology is basically the whole solution package of BlueCallom. Before I start talking about the innovation framework for KPIs and for data points and everything, we realized, even though there are hundreds, literally hundreds of definitions what innovation is, we had to develop our own version of it, which is not completely our own. Is basically, I would say, the best of all definitions. And we say the innovation is the introduction of a disruptive elevation in the way people do things. So it's about how people do things in the future, but it is an elevation, which is important to us. We don't want to be just different. And it is a disruption in the way people do things. And it's successful global distribution. I'll talk a little bit about it later on, but there is no super duper disruptive idea if it's not actually brought to a broad public. And so innovation is a combination of the idea and the execution. And that together is typically changing industry segments and how they do business. And that is innovation to us. So I just want to repeat it one more time. Innovation is the introduction of disruptive elevation in the way people do things, and its successful global distribution that changes how industry segments do business. And that definition should not build yet another definition of innovation, but it describes our thinking and why we do certain things and how we try to solve that complex, which is a complex of multiple things. And so, to make it very clear, improvement is not innovation. I think it's not just us. Most of the people in the innovation space, and even most of these hundreds of innovation definitions, are pretty much in line that improvement is not an innovation, even though there are people, in order to not lose a larger audience, say, well, gradual innovation. But honestly, and I think we need to be very clear about that, those types of versions of innovation not only make no sense, they're actually distractive. If somebody says, well, this is an improvement, but let's call it a gradual innovation, what happens if somebody has a disruptive innovation? They blow you out of the water. You have no chance of winning with your gradual innovation. It may be nice, sort of a self-excuse, because we haven't come up with something great, so we call something less great sort of still an innovation. Well, you can do this. You can call it anything what you want, but you cheat on yourself. It's not cheating on the competition. You cheat on yourself, exclusively on yourself, because nobody else cares what it is and what you call it. So innovation has this major effect on your competitiveness and your ability to actually compete in a global market. And it doesn't matter what you call it, but I think for our definitions, I want to make clear what we are calling it and what we're doing in order to create actually disruptive innovation or groundbreaking innovation, as we call it. For those who have been on some of our It's a little bit of a recap, but it builds the foundation not only for our way of innovating, but also for our way of getting data that helps us create what we call the KPI framework or innovation KPI framework. Ideas get basically created in our brain. I think this is where everybody is clear. There are people who think it comes from outer space and from other sources. I mean, you know, we may call it whatever we want to, but I think the majority of us is understanding that it comes from our brain. But if we don't know how it's done, then we settle with accidental results. And this is the single biggest problem industries around the world have, not really knowing where these ideas coming from, and therefore, other than from the brain, and therefore basically building to try to get to ideas that are typically weak. Now, as long as we all do that, and right now with very, very few exceptions, we all have done this till the very, current moment, then it's also okay because there is no competitive advantage one over the other. But what we're trying to do is help people get this competitive advantage by understanding how the brain works, and that makes a difference very, very quickly. So I have to say, what I learned from neuroscience, probably the most important thing to learn is that there is no magic idea. And every new idea ever created in the past and in the future is and was composed of previous impressions or previous experiences. That means these cells here, these neuron cells, excuse me, that processes chemicals in our brain, stimulating actions and reactions and stimulating our thoughts, they cannot come up with something special. All they can do is basically connect to each other and build out of the fusion of the content of these cells new experiences. If you have never seen a platypus, you cannot imagine by accident what it is. But if you've seen it as a child and not know today, but you see it for the second time today, you may actually remember, geez, yeah, I saw this. Now I understand what it is. And when you saw it, then you saw it move or something like that. But if you never had done that, I can tell you platypus and you don't know. So idea compositions basically are natural chemical processes and no serendipity. They're not coming out of the blue. They're not coming out of thin air. They're basically compositions. Now, and if we understand that, and that was the beginning of actually the BlueCallom neural ideation process and basically BlueCallom neural innovation, then we know that everything we think comes from past experiences and building new ideas. At the end of the day, we need to rethink innovation because we cannot wait for an idea. Waiting doesn't do anything. Our brain doesn't know what it shall wait for. There is nothing to wait for. Either it's there or it's not. So if you want to think about something, then your brain is actually looking to its repository of things that the brain experienced. And when we rethink innovation, knowing that we're based on past experiences, then we can actually start a process that we call neural ideation. And that is, in this case here, is one of these processes. And we said, okay, we think we have, and when we do that, and we are multiple people, then we have multiple past experiences. And if we share that, that's typically done in these brainstorm meetings, then this is a good thing. Now, we learned that brainstorming is not really bringing up disruptive ideas because the brain looks for the obvious quick answer, and it's trained to do that for 5 million years because if there is some danger, you have to have a quick response. And only danger is where the brain responds very quickly, and still does that still today. So, but when we understand how to do that, then we also understand that there is one group of people in our environment that is absolutely critical for our ideation process. And these are the experience owners or the experience holders. And very clearly, it's our customers. So here's one of the biggest problems in general corporate innovation labs, that they work in their kitchen, so to speak, on their own and rarely actually speak with customers. Fundamentally different than startups who continuously speak with customers because they don't have any really that they can talk to right now. So they're reaching out to all kinds of people and try to get their ideas and their problems and their dreams and their needs and so forth. Now, that means before we start ideation, we need to get to needs and dreams, and then we get to dream team assembly, and we get to these points backwards. We do the same forward. After we have an idea, build a disruptive business model, for instance, and then we validate the idea right away. We don't build prototypes and all kinds of things. We validate the idea. So a new way of thinking and innovation provides us new ways of measuring and reporting, because we have now, in this very case here, we have 12 distinct episodes, as we call it, because there's sort of encapsulated activities where we prepare our brain for great ideas, and then we bring these great ideas to market. Validate it before, try to get financing, get the approval of the management, and then bring it to market. You can already imagine that from these 12 episodes, or, we can call it all kinds of things, but I purposely don't call it steps, because we also learned that the brain works in a lateral way. So it connects and fires, simultaneously through 200 million neurons between the left and the right brain half. So there is no step-by-step process. It's a lateral process. And therefore, we don't call it steps, but we call it episodes, because each episode is sort of a thinking process in itself. When we look into one of these episodes, so we're here in the innovation opportunity discovery, for instance, we see multiple people coming up with multiple content snippets. These might be ideas, they may be a piece of research, this might be feedback from users. Then with this new teaming and collaborating, and particularly if we invite customers into the process, we get ways of validating and predicting what we're actually doing by so and so many people like it, and giving stars and rates and comments. And there's in the meantime, there's even a new feature that we call idea confluence. So we get a lot of data. And then we're actually at the point where we're talking about today. We can only get key performance indicators, an indication of our performance, if we have data from the past. And in our case, data from the past is when we start an innovation process. And the performance of each of these steps over time during that process indicates whether we go in the right direction. And in our case, we said, when we demystify disruptive innovation as sort of serendipity and accidental, and yeah, somebody had this billion-dollar idea, but the other people did not, we need to say goodbye to this thinking. We need to say hello to a natural process in our brain. That is, if somebody puts a gun at your head, you will be anxious. You will be afraid of the people pulling the trigger, and you start sweating and all these kind of things. We know that this is happening, and it's different between people. Some are sweating, some are not, but based on their wiring. So we know a couple things for a fact. We know that ideas are composed from past experiences. So if we know our past experiences and we look at it, we know what our repository is. We also know, because of the first topic, that our customers are the key experience holders. They may not solve the problem. And that's an interesting thing that we always see, that those who have the problem oftentimes are not able to solve it, particular if it's not an exclusive problem of their own behavior, but of a whole group. And these are companies, and we're talking about businesses, we're talking about customers, we're talking about global. So it's a complex system. And to solve a problem in this complex system needs people who will see this from the outside and not from the inside. However, we need the inside know-how to see it from the outside, because if this would be a closed bubble that is black and we see this not inside the black box, we can do anything. So then we also know how the brain composes large amounts of impressions into new solutions. So in our neural ideation process, those who know that we start with a warm up, then we start with analogous thinking, where the brain actually looks for related things to a certain problem. Then we're actually looking for serendipity, what else needs to be done before we get to a solution. We're looking for major, unrelated, and completely biased solutions. We call this the column burst. And then we go to the summit and the vision where we see everything together. So we know that the brain uses these techniques because we can observe people doing certain things and so we put it basically into our process. We know that we need to communicate to attract others. And this attraction is a key function because it starts with an innovation team. If the innovation team is a very homogeneous, cohesive, but diverse team, we know this is going to be great. But we need to attract these people. The next step is we need to attract customers helping us with their insights to build innovation. The next step is, once we got to the great ideas, we need to sell this internally. We need to sell this to management and finally to the CFO. Now, the CFO is a conservative person and you and the innovation team are progressive people. Different wiring, fundamentally different. And you cannot say they don't get it. We only must understand, if they don't get it, you did not communicate well. So CFO is one, the CEO is somebody else, a broader market is somebody else, business partners and alliances are people. So if we can communicate well, then the innovation will be a failure. We know that. The innovation value, the initial value of an idea is zero. We also know that. Already, I think 7-8 years ago, I wrote the blog post, the initial value of an idea is zero. And people were astounded. They said, what, are you crazy? I mean, you're the idea person and you say it's no value? Yes, it's no value. The initial value is zero. Relentless execution is basically the key success factor. And here comes another big problem of corporate innovation labs. They never even think about the execution because they say this is done by somebody else. If you cannot execute your own idea, there is nobody who can do it for you. And that is a profound understanding of startups all the way up to the unicorns. And this is the very reason why, we have about, what is it, 50,000 large global enterprises around the world. And they brought up about 5 to 10 innovations, groundbreaking innovations in the past 25 years. If the brain has the idea and composes it and a team together exchange this, day in and day out, full-time job, innovation manager, not part-time, they will be the ones who will also execute this idea. But if you transfer everything in your, let's say, 10 brains to somebody else, then you need the same time plus more times of the innovation process to tell them. So why not just do it yourself? But that is an understanding that need a change within an organization, that the innovation team remains intact with all the brain wirings they already spend, hours and hours and hours and hours on ideation, on verification, on market implementation, and so on, to actually execute. So we have this BlueCallom equation, G equals IE square. G is the groundbreaking innovation. E is the idea. And the idea, when it's act on it, it has the value of 1. No matter how good or how bad the idea is, if you have brilliant execution, and we all know that the best product never wins is one of the things. We have the first mover advantage and so on. And we realize, well, first mover advantage is actually first mover disadvantage because most second mover took over the first mover. Why is that? Because the idea itself is not relevant for the ultimate success. The idea is only relevant because without the idea, no execution would happen. The idea is basically the sperm that hits the egg, no matter what, and no matter what kind of living being on Earth. It needs this one to drive all the rest. Without that, it doesn't. But the real work is all the rest. And so the exponential growth of execution brings the success of a disruptive innovation. So G equals IE squared. With this formula, we actually went back and said, okay, what kind of metrics do we have today? If you Google innovation metrics, innovation KPIs, innovation measurement, innovation reporting, you find these lists and probably 100 more of, relatively speaking, the same arguments. Number of new products launched, revenue, profit growth for new products, ROI from innovation activities, whatever that means. Innovation budget as a % of revenue, number of active projects, number of ideas submitted by employees, time to innovate, start and end is still undefined, but sort of, we say, oh, well, we started sort of then and then. And some people say, well, when we have the first prototype, it's the time to innovation. The others say when it's in the market, the next says when it's successful. We won't find innovation process related KPIs anywhere because all these are budget, time, again, a budget and time and budget and time, but not innovation related. So we don't have, I can say this today, we don't have innovation specific key performance indicators on our innovation process. Change. You know, today, knowing how ideas get composed makes a huge difference because we can stimulate the idea and then we can process it because we know when we have this idea. If we don't have an idea about a certain problem within the time frame of 30 days, then we will not find the idea. It's very, very unlikely. And finding the idea is basically a curve, and it's an E function, and then it settles. So in the beginning, it takes a long time, and then it does this hockey stick, and then it fades out. And could have drawn this curve, but you can imagine. So we have a finite time frame for getting the idea, and if it doesn't come in that time frame, it will not come. So number of new products launched and revenue, profit, and all these topics, innovation budgets, are not innovation relevant. So we need to change that. Today we have our so-called innovation journey map. If we take the shortest version, then we start with the needs and dreams analysis, and then we go into the ideation, and then typically already here it stops. Done. Have an idea, here's a prototype, go do it. But it doesn't work that way. And this is the rest of the whole journey. And if nobody's taking care of it because everybody's busy with something else, you know, the idea stops right there. So we can measure time to innovate in very different ways when we understand the process. We can say, okay, how long does it take to get the needs and the dreams of our customers? We know the ideation process is between 1 and 4 weeks. Okay, we can develop a vision afterwards, usually done in a week, sometimes 2 or 3. But these are we're talking weeks. We don't talk years. Then we do the idea validation with our customers. Depending on how much customers we want to interview, we typically go back to those who helped us with the needs and dreams and basically verify if we met their expectation. Another week or so, then we have a conversation with the, and because we're lateral and not doing this at the last end, we start here and tell the CFO, we have the idea and tell the CFO, we have our vision, tell the CFO, we get with the validation back to the CFO. And at that time, also his or her brain has grown up with our concept, and we basically implement our neuroscience knowledge into that process. Because if we go, after we validated the idea and now have the meeting with the CFO, the likelihood that we're rejected is about 99 point something percent. Because their wiring and your wiring in your brain and their brain is so fundamentally different that there cannot be a connection. It's just not likely. I mean, I don't want to say it's not possible, but it's not likely. And this is where it comes in. But if we go from each of these steps to the CFO and keep them in the loop, a CFO is a numbers guy, so he needs data. And if we can provide data, but just sort of funny, nice experiences, that doesn't resonate with a CFO because he started the day with data and he ends the day with data. And if you come in between, it's at best a nice disruption, but that's what it is. So we need innovation relevant data to the wazoo, so to speak. And we need this not only for the CFO, but later on for the CEO and for our market, for the customers we talk to. And so we can measure time to innovate in very different ways. We can say, okay, we start here before we even had an idea, and we have the time to discovery, for instance. Then we have a time to innovation, meaning the ideation process. Then we have a time to vision development, and we have a time to validation. And these times, you can say, okay, yeah, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, doesn't matter. It's just a short period of time. Well, yes, but if we're all using that mechanism, then people will even compete on 4, 3, 6 weeks, and we'll try to do it in less time. I mean, we have this Ingenuity Cup coming up in April and May, where we're saying we can go from here to here in 40 days. Now, the typical innovation cycle of until we reach a market has been about 10 years. Sometimes it's 5 years or 3 years or 2 years. But that's it. Now we're talking 40 days. This seems to be ridiculous. But when we get more and more competitive, we need to go to the edge, not just a little bit further. Also, we need to disrupt and not improve. So time is a relevant thing. We can measure now budgets. What budgets are eaten up in this process, and you already see that when we realize the solution, and we do this only after we got the validation, it's basically the team budget, meaning employees and salaries, and that's it. So that's a good thing. And if we get to realizing a solution that was validated by the customer, then this guy here, the finance person, has it much easier to release capital and funds for this project versus if we just gamble around. If we get into the market, everybody knows this costs money, and we can now predict on time and on budget when we will achieve an ROI on our innovation. And since we know that our capacity in the brain is limited to past experiences, but we also know that our ability to compose these experiences is so massive. And if we know what we need to use in terms of tricks to make the brain do that, then we have a very robust and very predictable innovation process already. Now we can measure the operational parts. We can measure the team composition. Is it diverse enough? Do we use open innovation effects and so forth? So with neuro innovation and the understanding how things work in our brain and how we communicate, we can actually get a long way to a serious KPI framework. And so we built this framework on 4 quadrants: time, anything about finance, could say money, the ideas itself, the idea creation, and then the processes. And now if you recall our canvases, if you think about time, during the duration of a whole BlueCallom, so to speak, of a whole project and some predictable targets, as a goal, we have about 100 action fields with about 3 actions on average. When we talk about time, we have maybe a team of 12, and we generate about 3,600 data points. All the actions and everything everybody does can be recorded with an application. That is one of the fundamental shifts in innovation, that we actually have a technology beneath that is built based on the method and not based on a project management system. So we get data points that are innovation relevant. The same on the finance side. Budget needs, for the first couple of weeks, we need only human resources who can think. We don't even need to build prototypes, because we know that if we think right, we do the right thing. And we build out sort of a goal for project ROI. If we have a team of 12 and we have about our 10 episodes, this generates about 120 financial data points that helps us to predict and plan finance, including the ROI, for a on-innovation project-based activity. So we can calculate an ROI on a particular innovation, and we can predict that it will happen in 3 to 4 to 5 years. Now, some people may say, and some CFOs may say, my ROI horizon on anything and everything we do is less than 2 years. Sayonara, ciao, baby. Well, then we need to educate the CFO a little bit that there is no inclusive all, and I repeat, all unicorns that made it in less than 5 years. There was no ROI in less than 5 years. So if you do 5 years, you are above and beyond basically everything that existed today. But the CFO doesn't know that. So we need to have these data and also communicate them. On the idea process and the ideation process, again, we have about 60 action fields that are roughly 100% focused on ideation and some on opinion or ideation supporting acts. And if we serve them with our team of 12, plus maybe 20 customers, there are on average 5 different actions. You remember the confluence button and the, the likes and so forth. We generate roughly 10,000 data points right on the ideation part. So if we have 5 projects simultaneously, we have a repository of 60,000 data points where we can compare teams. And we can see that the one team was faster here, but slower there. They did more on the ideation side, the other did more on the execution side, and so on. And based on the industry and based on the company and the company culture and their objectives and their long-term goals, the management can, for the first time, actually begin to navigate and understand, okay, why are these people here who spend more time on the execution, which is a good thing, less time on the ideation, are still not as successful as those with the ideation powerhouses and then simply execute it. And there might be different answers. One answer, of course, might be, yeah, they thought more through stuff and therefore execution was easier. But it may be the other way around, and people would say, yeah, okay, they thought through all this stuff, but the execution here was just relentless execution, power every day. And so the learning is different, and this has to do again with culture and how people do things. But for the first time, we have a KPI framework that can actually look into that. And that is what this is an early form still. This is our current iteration, or the one that will come in next. We have a lot of more things to come, but also here, I mean, Rome wasn't built in one day. So we have a global innovation team location if this is a global enterprise. So we see, okay, where are the people sitting, the numbers, and so on. The time management, we have sort of time allocation, a target timeline, and an actual timeline, and see how they did month by month. Here's an interesting one and a very important one, and this is why it's big and bright, is the talent composition, the degree of diversity. And whether we make a bar or not, we decided we go for the circle because this, this indicates with the first view. Okay, this is colorful around the circle. Okay, that means there's a lot of different people in there. And that's one of the key performance indicators, talent diversification. If we have only engineers or only physicists or chemists or biologists and so on, the innovation will not be very good. The problem solver and they're sitting on the solving side of a problem, and many cannot even solve their own problem. We learned this. And if it's their problem to solve it, then the likelihood that it will be a disruptive innovation is actually very, very, very slim. We have episode data like data points that we aggregated over time, and so on. We get market validation. So this is the feedback from customers and partners. Oops, there's a typo. So business partners, like it can be, alliance partners, can be resellers, channels, wholesaler, trade, and so forth, is an equally important feedback contributor than the customer or the user itself. And then here's some core business KPIs. This is like opportunity. So we have TTO is time to opportunity, time to innovation, time to validation. And we see the number of days, and we see when ROI is supposed to be kicking in. So in this case, would be actually less than 2 years. But that's just demo data. And we have the associated costs. So to get to the opportunity understanding and what is the innovation opportunity, it costs us, simply HR, people and time, 250,000. The innovation itself was 280,000. The validation cost us 140,000. In going to market, 6.5 million. And also here, the ROI was actually after that cost was hit after 526 days. Then there are a couple of other innovation value KPIs, the degree of innovation. And we're not calculating sort of the quote unquote gradual innovation, but the degree based on what the customers say. If that is disruptive to them and they have to change the behavior, they have to change processes, they have to change something else, most likely actually the activities of a day. They need a training because it's a rethinking process and so on. Now, all of this sounds negative because change sounds negative, but we only achieve disruption with change. And if you look at, the Nestle, Nespresso, that was a change, but it took 10 years to get to market with it. If you look at Tesla, lots of changes. I mean, fuel station, charging stations and different cars and now we have batteries and so on. But it took 5 years from the inception. This was pre Elon Musk when the team of the two started to Tesla until they got actually into the market. And now 10 years or 12 years almost later, they basically get into mainstream, but we're still not at mainstream level with electric cars. We're just hitting it right now. So the degree of innovation is important. The index contribution or the idea contribution index is how many ideas get contributed relative to other contributing important ideas, content. The vision range. So is it 2 years, 5 years, 7 or 10 years? We put this basically as milestones in. And if you have a 2-year vision, then the vision range is certainly smaller and less attractive than if you have a 10-year vision. 10-year, most people say, I don't know what's in 10 years. Nobody could predict Corona. Yes, true, nobody could predict it, even though some people did, because there is a cycle of viruses. We know today that in Alaska, there are viruses found in the ice sheets from about, I believe, 10,000 years or even hundreds of thousands of years ago. It has not been discovered before, and nobody knows what these viruses will do and will be when they come alive. They're just still frozen. So there are things that we know, but we don't know everything, but everything is known. And that is part of the understanding of innovation as well. We need to reach out to learn and think and get understanding in order to act. And then finally, the adoption growth rate. This is when we're in this part of the episode, when we're going to market and bring it to the market. How fast is the adoption and how much the growth rate within the adoption phase? Is this exponential? Then we're good. Is it less than exponential? We're at risk that somebody else will come in and blow us away. And this is why D equals E square. Execution potential, execution to the power of 2 is a key factor in innovation. And we see this in many companies. I spoke with one of the largest Japanese tech companies, IT tech builders, and they were wondering why they are not with their best product. And as far as I understood, it was really one of the best, if not the best technology in a certain space. They did not win. I saw this and saw there's no exponential growth. Why is it not? Because everything is in Japanese. Even their Japanese people in the foreign countries are speaking internally Japanese. The communication lacking. Everything is done the Japanese way and has to be the Japanese way. And this is why they did not win. Has nothing to do with how good the idea was. And again, D equals IE squared. So with all that together, we have a KPI system that people can work for the first time on key performance indicators to drive innovation. It was not possible before. My 4 companies that I built, I hadn't anything of that. I was just driving it as hard as I could. And now with our own tech, we use this twice now in our company. And both of the times I was blown away how much faster we were before, compared to before what I did sort of intuitively. Day and night, we hit our own quote unquote world record 2 weeks ago with a project where we got basically from 0. Nobody knew what the task was. We gave it on day 1. And 5 days later, we had a groundbreaking innovation. 5 days. That was very cool. So we know it's working, and it was mind-blowing I tend to say even for me. This sounds too arrogant, but I'm used to think innovative, but this was totally unexpected. And so we know that the method combined with the technology will get us there. And so here, just a few seconds about our implementation service. I don't want to sell this here, but so that we go in a certain order. This is now step-by-step. Objective definition, the team assembly coaching, because team assembly is a key factor in making innovation happy or happening. Innovation team training, guided implementation. So we came to the conclusion that we need, at least in the next 2 years, we need to guide customers through that process, because we're working now 4 years on the methodology, and I don't want to even tell how long I worked on innovation projects on my own and with startups. And then the final project evaluation, where everybody says, was good, we achieved it or not. Real quick, there is a next Deep Innovation Design Champion training, starts on Monday, April 26th, so it's this month. If you're interested, you will go through 5 days on training. It's all morning sessions in Europe, so it starts at 9, goes till noon. In Asia, it would be the afternoon till the early evening. And we have another session for the US, which is completely separate because this is our evening and it's in the morning in California. So they all instructor-led online live sessions, so Q&A, discussions. We have about 30% is discussions, and about 60% is lecturing, and then there's the rest is Q&A. And we will guide you through this new way of innovation from start to finish, including all the, the data and the understanding of the KPIs and what have you. At the end, you will make a test and you get a certificate. And that was that we ran last month for the first time. And this was the group who actually came up with a disruptive innovation without knowing what the task was on Monday morning. And they had it basically by Thursday evening. I was blown away. I have to say, this was mostly partners. So they were all from the innovation space. They were all trained and educated on other innovation methods like design thinking and so on. So they knew already some of the mechanisms, but I would say 80% was new to them, and the results were just amazing. So if you're interested, you find us. Then there's another next step for you, trial version, for instance, or like I said, the Deep Innovation Design training. But you can also join the Ingenuity Cup that starts on April 21, and you get basically a training as well, the same training like I just introduced. And we run a 40-day groundbreaking innovation competition. So we will help you to not only get groundbreaking ideas, but actually groundbreaking innovation into the market within 40 days. Now, I hear continuously the first argument, but you cannot get a groundbreaking idea and into the market in 40 days. Obey all the rules and regulations when we talk about hardware or physical, physics, borderlines, chemicals or medicine and so on. And I can tell you from about 1,000 startups I worked with, this is always the argument. It has been always the argument for me when I talk to my investors, and I was always turned down, and I realized, I could get in a very short order of time to amazing results. It's not because of me, has nothing to do with me. It has to do with a process. And that is what we're instituting. And the Ingenuity Cup basically will demonstrate that we can help everybody who has, sort of the ground foundation done, like diverse teams and so on. We get there in 40 days. You probably don't believe it, and I don't blame you for that, because it sounds unbelievable. But we would not do that because we put all our resources in here if we wouldn't know that it works. Then there is something new we haven't announced yet. I can't wait to announce it and be the first who knows. We will do the the Ingenuity Cup every year. And so 2021 is the first. And on the 5th one in 2025, we're working with one of the first commercial space flight organizers. We will get you to space in 2025. And we take basically the best of the 5 Ingenuity Cups, and they're competing for that space award. And I'm still trying to collect enough money to actually join the winning team. I work with this group now for a couple of weeks, actually months. It must be, an extraordinary event, and I just can't wait to actually get on there myself. But that will be the winning, reward for the best of the best in 2025. And with that, I want to give it back to Cleo in case there are some questions that I can possibly answer, and invite you to join us on LinkedIn and our Facebook groups. Those who are LinkedIn group fans, the one, it's just not really discussions, but on Facebook, it's more a discussion group. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, and thank you so much for the presentation, Axel. And now it is time to jump into the question and answer session. So I'll go ahead and kind of kick that off. But if you're thinking of any additional questions, just feel free to chat me now, and we can also answer them in real time. So there's still time to input your questions. But let's go ahead and get started with our first question, which is, what KPIs do you think are most relevant for a product company?
So, I mean, it's the thing is that the KPI framework, let me just maybe go back to it real quick, is a framework of 4 groups, and these groups are built on the fact or on the questions from most C-level executives. They want to know and want to have a more predictable timeline. And so the time to innovate and the time to market are probably the 2 major KPIs in the time segment. But the people also want to know about the finance. And so I would say the ROI would be the #1 KPI in the finance section. On the idea, there are 2 or 3 major KPIs. One is what we call the idea confluence. And this is to understand where the ideas came from, who in the team actually brought up an idea that others built on. And it goes a little bit beyond today, but imagine that, you know, every idea, every innovation was always built on top of other innovations. The innovation is typically the assembly of one or a group of people's ideas and experiences, and then form an innovation. And take Uber, for instance. And people realized, okay, you know, car driving is good, eat would be good, delivery would be good. Take Tesla. I mean, battery cars. Well, maybe we build for it, and batteries and so on. Take the capsule from Nestle, you know, the new coffee machines that use the capsules and so forth. So ideas build on ideas, and confluence is one. The time to innovate goes a little bit back into time. The number of contributions, how many people did actually valuable, let's say 4-star and better idea contributions. And then on the process side, it's basically not so much the KPI of a group, but the comparison of groups. That would be very interesting and important to see how, if we have multiple groups, and I mean, I've seen even smaller mid-market product companies with 200 people in their innovation center, split up in, I think, 40 or 50 groups. So now competing or comparing would be an amazing way to learn. It's not about you are the better and you are not so good, but it's about the learning. What did you do differently to achieve this and that goal?
Okay, yeah.
It's kind of help.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And so our next question, which is also our last question, is what are the key things that an organization should do to start using this KPI framework?
To use the KPI framework is basically having 2 things in place. One is the methodology that delivers through the activities the data, and the other is the software. I mean, right now we're the first and only with that complexity and with that complete software package, but there might be people following us. So it's a software that actually aggregates all the data points and then assembles it and shows it in a report like I showed earlier, like this one, and basically shows the major data that people can use for saying, okay, why is the market validation going up and then down and then up again? What did we do? Well, we didn't ask people in this time period and so on. We should ask more. I mean, the whole learning process will be part of this, but we need obviously a display and tell you the dashboard is growing. So there's very fancy new technologies coming up in the next couple of months. But it's the technology and also the methodology that delivers the data and makes it visible in order to use it.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I hope that everyone that's listening in our audience today is excited about incorporating some of these KPIs and using this KPI framework for disruptive innovation going forward. And that actually concludes the presentation for today. So thank you so much for joining us. And as Axel mentioned previously, feel free to join us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook, and register your team for the Ingenuity Cup as well. We would love to have you and your team to be a part of this 40-day innovation competition. And so on behalf of the BlueCallom team, thank you so much for attending, and we hope that you have a great rest of your day or evening, wherever you are. Bye, everyone.
All right. Thank you also from my side. Thanks, Cleo.